So what would you do if no one could see you?
Ooh, that is the ultimate question, right?
And really, truly think about the mechanics of it. If the physical consequences of your actions, the risk of getting caught, the eyes of society, wait, no, the eyes of society they just vanished into thin air?
Yeah, completely gone.
Exactly. Would you become a hero, slipping into the shadows to right the wrongs of the world, or would you slowly, like inevitably become a monster?
Well, it's the ultimate thought experiment because it forces us to confront whether our morality is actually an inherent part of who we are or if it's just a performance.
Have a performance for the audience.
Right, because we know we're being watched.
Yeah.
I mean, you remove the mirror of other people's judgment, and suddenly that rigid moral structure we all pride ourselves on
Yeah.
starts to look terrifyingly fragile.
And that fragility is really the core of what we're unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a debut novel that takes this classic, almost pulpy sci-fi concept of invisibility and just completely weaponizes it.
Oh, weaponize is a great word for it.
The book is called The Man Who Vanished. It's also sometimes referred to by its subtitle, The Shadow of Invisibility. And rather than, a superhero origin story, it operates as this dark, highly realistic mirror for modern surveillance, identity, and really how absolute freedom just rots the human mind.
Which is exactly what makes the sources we're pulling from today so compelling. We've got the synopsis, the author's background, and some deeply analytical editorial reviews.
Yeah, some really heavy stuff.
Seriously. Because you look at the cover, you read the premise about a guy uncovering a secret in Egypt that makes him physically invisible, and you expect a standard high-octane espionage thriller, right?
Right, like global conspiracies, explosions, muscle cars.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But the consensus across the board is that this is actually a literary ascent into psychological hell.
Mhm.
It prioritizes the decay of the mind over, like, the action of the body.
Okay, so to understand that decay, we really have to look at who is actually decaying here. Because the protagonist, Ghassan Jawhar, is not the guy you expect to find at the center of an international conspiracy.
Not at all.
Right, like when you hear espionage thriller, you're conditioned to expect this hyper-competent super spy, a Jason Bourne type who can calculate bullet trajectories in his head, or kill an assassin with a rolled-up magazine.
Yeah, the classic action hero.
But Gus is just a guy. I mean, his primary survival skill, the single thing that keeps him alive when he suddenly vanishes from sight and becomes hunted by a criminal underworld, is perfume making.
Which is a massive structural risk by the author. I mean, think about it. When you write a book about a character who is entirely invisible, you're immediately robbing the reader of their primary sensory anchor.
Oh, that's a good point. You can't see him.
Right. You can't describe his expressions. You can't describe how the light hits his face or his physical reactions to danger. The author has to replace that visual element with something equally visceral, or the character just he floats away into nothingness.
And so he replaces it with scent. It is just brilliant. I kept picturing it like a bat using echolocation.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Yeah, but entirely factory. Gus can't be seen, but he still has to navigate a physical world filled with doors and stairs and, people who actively want him dead. So he uses his highly trained nose to build this three-dimensional map of his environment.
He's not just smelling things casually.
Yeah, he's dissecting the chemical notes of a room to sense danger, to track people, to know who is in a space hours before he even got there.
And the editorial reviews actually draw a really sharp comparison here to Umberto Eco.
Oh, interesting. Like the name of the rose.
Exactly. Eco was famous for blending historical fiction with semiotics, the study of signs and symbols. And what the author is doing in The Man Who Vanished is establishing a semiotics of scent.
Wow. Semiotics of scent.
Yeah, so perfume, sweat, gunpowder, stale coffee, they aren't just background details. They're a hidden language.
A language that only Gus is truly fluent in, which gives him this bizarre tactical advantage. Like, if an assassin is waiting for him in a pitch-black room, Gus might not be able to see him, but he can smell the specific unwashed wool of the guy's coat.
Or the metallic tang of the weapons.
Yes, exactly.
And that's exactly how it plays out in the book. Gus reads the olfactory top notes of a bustling Cairo market, the spices, the exhaust fumes, and he filters them out to find the base notes of the person hunting him.
It's so cool.
It forces the audience to experience the thriller through an entirely different sensory apparatus. We are so used to visual storytelling, even in prose. This book forces you to smell the danger before you see it.
Okay, I have to push back on the execution of that, though.
Oh.
Because, On paper, describing the base notes of a Cairo market sounds incredibly poetic. But in the middle of a life-or-death chase sequence, you're blending dust and bullets and adrenaline with the delicate, refined art of perfume making.
I see where you're going with this.
Right.
Good.
I just struggle to see how that doesn't feel completely disjointed or like it slows the pacing to a crawl. How does smelling jasmine help you dodge a bullet without sounding ridiculous?
Well, it doesn't sound ridiculous precisely because the contrast is the whole point. One of the reviews actually likens this technique to Stephen King's methodology.
Okay, Stephen King, how so?
So, King is a master of taking a wildly unbelievable supernatural element like telekinesis or a haunted car, whatever it might be, and tethering it to something brutally mundane. He'll describe the exact brand of stale cigarettes in an ashtray while a ghost is literally tearing a room apart.
Oh, so it's about cognitive dissonance. You ground the impossible in the hyper-real so the reader's brain accepts it?
Yes. By focusing the narrative lens on the sharp, undeniable reality of a specific scent, the author forces your brain to accept the impossible reality that the person doing the smelling is invisible.
The scent is the tether.
Exactly. Without it, the sci-fi element floats away into fantasy. With it, the invisibility feels hyper-real. It feels almost heavy.
Heavy is definitely the right word. Because while his nose is helping him survive the physical chase, his mind is just collapsing under the weight of the isolation.
Completely collapsing.
And this is where the story shifts from how he interacts with the world to how the world's absence is destroying him internally. The source text makes this fascinating distinction. It says for Gus, invisibility is not a superpower. It's a temptation, then a weapon, and ultimately a curse.
Right. And if we look at the literary ancestors of this concept,
Yeah.
H.G. Wells wrote the definitive predecessor with The Invisible Man.
What classic.
But in Wells's novel, the focus is heavily on the physiological madness of the isolation. The sheer psychological break of being visually cut off from humanity drives the protagonist insane.
Whereas this book does something different.
Yeah, The Man Who Vanished pivots that focus entirely. It's not interested in the madness of isolation. It's deeply concerned with the morality of isolation.
So wait, madness is losing your grip on reality, but morality is losing your grip on your own boundaries.
Exactly. When the magnetic north of societal judgment is removed, your compass just spins wildly.
Wow.
Think about the panopticon effect. A large part of why we behave, why we adhere to social contracts, is the subconscious awareness that we're observable.
Someone is always watching.
Right. So when the consequences of our actions vanish, when you can walk into a vault or a private meeting or a rival's home and absolutely no one will ever know you were there, the boundaries between justice and transgression don't just blur, they erode entirely. What stops you from taking what you want?
There's a line from the text that perfectly captures that erosion. It says, "Some hungers leave scars you cannot see."
Ooh, that's a good line.
It's chilling because it highlights that the real violence in this book isn't the espionage. The real violence is what Gus is doing to his own soul every time he gives in to the temptation to cross a line just because he can.
It's an internal rotting process. Every step he takes deeper into the unseen world to survive, he is simultaneously fighting his own hardening curiosity. He starts rationalizing behaviors he would have found abhorrent as a visible man.
And the sources draw a parallel here to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and the architecture of the story absolutely supports that.
Oh, 100%.
In Conrad's work, you have this grueling physical journey down a river into the jungle, but every mile traveled physically is actually a mile traveled deeper into the darkest, most savage parts of the human psyche.
The geography is a metaphor.
Right. And here Gus is physically fleeing across the globe, from Egypt to Corsica, but the geography is secondary. The real journey is this terrifying descent into his own mind. He isn't just running from assassins, he's running from the monster waking up inside himself.
But, that internal rot doesn't happen in a vacuum. A character can't just sit in an empty room and slowly turn evil.
Yeah.
They need a catalyst.
They need a push.
Yeah, and the thriller mechanics of the book provide this massive external pressure cooker that accelerates his moral decay. If Gus is losing his humanity, he was being actively pushed there by people who have already abandoned theirs.
Which brings us to the threats. And the villains here are fascinating because they act as direct philosophical foils to Gus.
Let's talk about Jacques.
Yes. First, we have Jacques. The reviews describe him as a corporate predator, but he isn't like a cackling comic book villain tying people to train tracks. He is terrifying because he is so deeply realistic.
Jacques represents the ultimate institutional chill. If Gus is a character who is hyper-aware of the messy, sensory reality of human beings smelling their fear, understanding their sweat, reading their perfume. Jacques is the polar opposite.
He's a machine.
He treats human interactions like an algorithm treats data points. He doesn't see a person with a life and a family. He sees a predictable set of inputs, outputs, and liabilities.
He strips the humanity out of the equation entirely. And on the flip side of that, you have the character of Lisa. She fills the archetype of the femme fatale, but the analysis points out she is serving a much more complex function than just a love interest or a trap.
She's a moral test.
Exactly.
In classic noir, the femme fatale is usually the physical embodiment of the protagonist's downfall. She lures men. But Lisa operates as a mirror. She navigates this shadowy world of secrets and espionage with a very different set of justifications than Gus uses.
She challenges him.
Right. Her presence forces Gus, and by extension, you, the reader, to confront the lies he's telling himself. When she questions his actions, she is poking holes in his crumbling integrity.
Okay, I want to pause here and look at the mechanics of the world they are fighting over, because there is a technological element mentioned in the sources that completely threw me during my read-through.
Let me guess. Quantum stealth.
Yes, quantum stealth. Now, up until this point, we're talking about semiotics, perfume, and corporate algorithms. Suddenly, we have quantum stealth.
It sounds like a jump.
It does. Is this a magic spell he found in an Egyptian tomb? Or are we suddenly reading hardcore sci-fi? Because shifting from a literary thriller to Harry Potter halfway through seems like a massive leap.
It is a crucial question of genre, and honestly, it's where the author plays his smartest card. Quantum stealth is not magic. It is grounded in actual theoretical physics. We are talking about metamaterials.
Okay, explain metamaterials for us.
They're materials engineered to have properties that don't occur naturally.
So we are talking about light manipulation, not invisibility cloaks woven by wizards.
Precisely the distinction. Imagine a material that bends electromagnetic waves around an object, the exact same way water flows around a rock in a stream and reconnects on the other side.
Oh, wow. Okay, that paints a picture.
Yeah, so the light from behind the subject is projected forward, effectively turning them into a walking blind spot. The inclusion of this technology is the twist that firmly yanks the fantasy out of the supernatural and drops it right into terrifying modern reality. We're dealing with theoretical physics applied to modern warfare and surveillance.
That makes the comparison to Blake Crouch's Dark Matter make so much more sense.
Exactly.
Crouch uses the mind-bending concepts of quantum physics not to write a dry science manual, but to explore the deeply emotional horror of losing your family and your identity. The science is just a vehicle for the human dread.
And structurally, Jawhar uses that dread to manipulate the pacing of the entire novel. I mean, thrillers usually have a relentless breakneck pace, but the reviews specifically highlight a long domestic lull right in the middle of the narrative.
Which is so unusual.
It is. Gus actually settles down. He finds a quiet rhythm, a taste of normal life, completely isolated from the chase.
And I imagine a lot of readers who came for an action movie might complain that the pacing drags there. Like, why is our invisible man making coffee and doing laundry?
Oh, that's a common critique of the genre for sure.
Yeah.
But the deeper analysis points out why that lull is structurally vital. You cannot understand the devastation of losing something if you don't know what it feels like to hold it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
By giving Gus a sustained taste of peace, of mundane domesticity, the high-octane, tech-driven nightmare of the final confrontation feels earned. The violence has an actual emotional cost, rather than just being explosive set dressing.
He has to build the house before the villains can burn it down. Okay, understanding this hyper-realistic application of metamaterials and this deep dive into corporate espionage leads to a massive question.
Who wrote this?
Yes, who actually wrote this? Because crafting a narrative that accurately balances the physics of light refraction, the chemistry of perfume, and the psychological weight of isolation requires a very specific mind.
Well, this brings us to the architect of the unseen, the author himself, Ghassan Jawhar. He is an Arab writer and poet making his English language debut, and the meta connection here is impossible to ignore. The author's name is Ghassan Jawhar. The protagonist's name is Gus Jawhar.
Gus is literally just an abbreviation of Ghassan. He put himself into the center of the crosshairs. Why would an author self-insert into a story about being relentlessly hunted?
It makes complete sense when you look at his resume. Outside of his literary work, Ghassan Jawhar has a deep professional background in telecommunications and complex digital systems.
Wait, telecom?
Yes.
That completely shifts the framework of the entire book.
It snaps the entire narrative into a new focus. Suddenly, this story about a man who becomes physically invisible, who is navigating a world of secrets and exposing hidden conspiracies. Wait, no, I mean, it isn't just a sci-fi thriller. It's a massive, sprawling metaphor for modern digital
Oh my
surveillance.
God. We are Gus.
Yep.
Think about it. Every time you walk down the street with your cell phone, you are physically visible, but digitally, you are a ghost. You're invisible to the cell towers, but those towers are pinging you, tracking your location, building a three-dimensional map of your habits, your purchases, your life.
It's terrifying when you phrase it like that.
But it's true. You leave a digital exhaust behind you, just like Gus leaves a physical scent.
Jawhar is taking his intimate knowledge of the unseen forces of technology, the data tracking, the algorithmic profiling, the massive telecommunications infrastructure that shapes everything we do, and translating that invisible abstract dread into a visceral, physical thriller.
It's brilliant.
The paranoia Gus feels about being hunted by an unseen enemy using quantum stealth is the exact same paranoia we all subconsciously harbor about being tracked by algorithms and corporate predators.
The book is just making the silent anxiety of the modern world loud. That is incredible. And it explains so much about his writing style, too. Translating that kind of systemic digital dread requires a specific cadence. As a poet, the sources note that Jawhar brings a completely different rhythm to the prose than a standard thriller writer.
Right, he moves fluidly between very gentle sensory descriptions and sharp, brutal action. He allows the poetry to breathe through the violence, which prevents the action from feeling mindless.
And there is a specific poetic device mentioned that just blew my mind. He occasionally weaves monorhyme into the English prose.
Oh yeah, the monorhyme.
For anyone unfamiliar, monorhyme is a poetic structure where every single line in a stanza or even a whole poem ends with the exact same rhyming sound. It's a very foundational element of traditional Arabic poetry. But to subtly weave that rhythmic repetition into an English-language espionage thriller during suspense sequences.
Think about the mechanical effect that has on the reader's brain.
Right.
When you're reading a scene where Gus is hiding, terrified, trying to remain undetected, and the sentences begin to end on the same phonetic beat, it mimics a racing heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump.
Oh, wow. Linguistic claustrophobia.
Exactly. The tension isn't just in what is happening in the plot. The tension is physically baked into the structure of the paragraphs.
The reviewer who called this a thinking person's thriller nailed it. It is operating on the surface level of plot, the thematic level of a digital surveillance metaphor, and the structural level of the prose itself.
Which brings us back to the core question we started with. When we synthesize all of these elements, the perfume-making protagonist using scent to navigate blindness, the psychological erosion of isolation, the algorithmic cruelty of corporate villains, and the author's translation of telecom surveillance into physical dread, what are we left with?
A lot to process.
Yeah, The Man Who Vanished is clearly not just a gimmick about sneaking around unseen.
Not at all. It uses the physical impossibility of invisibility as a lens to examine the very real crisis of privacy, power, and accountability in our actual world. We live in an era where we are simultaneously hyper-visible on social media, yet completely anonymous behind screens. We deal with the temptation of consequence-free actions every single time we log onto the internet.
The novel ultimately functions as a cautionary tale about the weight of carrying secrets. The protagonist sees the absolute worst of humanity when the lights are turned off. He feels the terrifying pull of that darkness himself. And his journey is about deciding whether to succumb to it or to bear the burden of that knowledge so others don't have to.
It's a story about the death of innocence, yes, but it's also about the birth of a very specific, modern kind of resilience. The resilience to remain human when no one is watching.
Very well said.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of The Man Who Vanished. It's a complex sensory journey that really forces you to reevaluate how you move through the world.
And as we close the book on this one, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked about the metaphor of digital tracking. Think about your own life right now, every single day, through the screens we stare into, the phones sitting in our pockets, and the massive trails of digital footprints we leave behind. We are interacting with unseen forces that monitor and monetize our behavior.
Constantly.
But if the quantum stealth technology from this novel broke out of the realm of theoretical physics and became a reality tomorrow, if you were suddenly granted perfect, untraceable invisibility in the physical world, how long would your own moral compass survive before the darkness woke up inside of you?